You think you understand decay. You've seen fruit blacken on a forgotten counter, watched rust devour metal, smelled the sweet rot of something dead left too long in summer heat. But you don't understand, not really. Because those things are already gone when the rot takes them. They don't feel it happening. They don't wake up every morning and discover another piece of themselves has turned to soup inside their own skin. They don't hear the laughter bubbling up from their liquefying lungs. They don't smile when they should be screaming, "I did." And before you turn away, before you decide this is just another tale of corruption and chaos, I need you to understand something. The true horror of Nurgle's gift isn't the rotting. It's that eventually you learn to love it. My name was Corvus Hale, Lieutenant in the Astra Militarum, 3rd Mordian Iron Guard, stationed on a world whose name has been stricken from every imperial record. We called it Verdantis, green lush, a paradise after 6 months of desert warfare on the previous deployment. The recruiting officers promised us garrison duty, said we'd earned it after the grinding meat factory of the last campaign. They lied, but then, they always do. Verdantis wasn't a paradise. It was a larder, and we were the fresh meat Nurgle had ordered for his table. I just didn't know it yet. None of us did, not when we made planetfall. Not when we set up our forward operating base in the ruins of what the colonists had called New Prosperity. Not even when we found the first bodies. The settlement had been empty for 3 months according to orbital surveys. 15,000 colonists vanished. No distress calls. No evacuation signatures. Just silence and those damned green forests pressing in from every direction. Command wanted answers. They sent us into the ruins with Auspex scanners and a mandate to report anything unusual. We found unusual. Emperor help us, we found it in abundance. The first body was in what had been a chapel, still kneeling before a defaced statue of the Emperor. The statue's face had been chiseled away and replaced with something else. Something that smiled too wide. 7 circles carved into its chest. The colonist at its feet had been dead maybe a week. The corpse was bloated, swollen with gases until the skin was stretched drum, tight and mottled with colors I'd never seen on human flesh. Purples and greens and yellows that seemed to shift in the dim light filtering through the chapel's shattered windows. But that wasn't what made Sergeant Kane vomit into his rebreather. It was the flies. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. They covered the body like a living blanket, and when we approached, they rose as one with a sound like tearing silk. They didn't scatter. They formed a cloud, a buzzing mass that hung in the air between us and the corpse, and I swear by the golden throne they were watching us. Flies don't watch. They don't have the intelligence. But these did. I could feel their attention like pressure against my eyes. Kane was screaming for us to fall back, but I couldn't move. None of us could. We just stood there while the flies descended, landing on our uniforms, our exposed skin, our faces. They didn't bite. They just crawled, exploring, tasting. I felt one walk across my lips, and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't open my mouth, because then it would get inside, and that thought was somehow worse than anything else. Then they were gone, rising again in that terrible coordinated mass and flowing out through the chapel door into the green hell beyond. We should have left then. We should have called for immediate evac and orbital bombardment. But we didn't. We had our orders. We had 15,000 missing colonists to account for, and we had no idea that those flies had already delivered us to our god. The infection started small, a rash on Private Menken's forearm where a fly had landed. He showed it to the company medica that evening. Just a patch of red skin, slightly raised, itching terribly. The medica gave him standard anti-inflammatory ointment and told him to keep it clean. By morning, the rash had spread to his elbow. Small pustules had formed, weeping a clear fluid that smelled faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. The medica quarantined him immediately and put the rest of us on observation. 3 hours later, Corporal Vess started scratching her neck. 6 hours after that, half the squad showed symptoms. I was clean. I thought I was lucky. I thought the Emperor had spared me for some greater purpose. What a fool I was. Nurgle doesn't spare anyone. He just takes his time with the ones he loves most. We set up a quarantine zone in what had been the settlement's medica facility. 37 personnel showed symptoms by the end of the second day. The company medica, a severe woman named Helsa Crane, worked herself to exhaustion trying to identify the pathogen. Nothing in her database matched. The symptoms were wrong. Infections this aggressive should have killed the afflicted within hours, but instead they seemed to stabilize. The pustules would burst and weep, then scab over with a thick greenish crust. The rashes spread but didn't seem to cause systemic failure. Mencken, the first infected, was coherent and conversational. He said the itching had stopped. He said he actually felt better than he had in years. He said the scabs were singing to him. Crane sedated him after that and requested immediate contact with Orbital Command. The Vox network was downed. Every channel filled with static and what might have been whispering in a language that made my teeth ache. We were alone. By day 5, I understood that we weren't dealing with a natural disease. This was something else. Something intelligent. The infected started changing. Not dying. Changing. Their skin took on that same mottled coloration we'd seen on the corpse in the chapel. Their eyes yellowed, then filmed over with a milky cataract that somehow didn't blind them. They moved differently. Slower. More deliberately. Like they were listening to instructions only they could hear. And they were happy. That was the worst part. They were deliriously, obscenely happy. Mencken spent hours laughing to himself, a wet bubbling sound that came from deep in his chest. When Crane tried to sedate him again, he caught her wrist with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone in his condition. He looked at her with those yellow, filmed eyes and said she didn't need to worry. He said grandfather was taking care of everything. He said we were all blessed and soon we'd understand. Crane pulled her sidearm and shot him in the head. His corpse was still smiling when it hit the floor. The flies came for it within minutes. I watched them swarm through the broken windows, that same coordinated mass we'd seen in the chapel. They covered Mencken's body, and beneath their writhing carpet his flesh began to move. Not the spasms of dying nerves, actual movement, reorganization. When the flies finally dispersed 3 hours later, there was no body. Just a pile of something that looked like wet compost and smelled like a garden after spring rain. Beautiful. Wrong. The infected in the other beds were weeping with joy. Crane put the facility on total lockdown and ordered the uninfected to shoot anyone who tried to leave. We were 48 personnel at that point. 39 infected. 9 holding the perimeter. I was still clean, still lucky, still condemned. The dreams started that night. I was standing in a garden larger than worlds. Trees grew from corpse soil. Their branches hung with fruit that pulsed like exposed organs. Flowers bloomed from beds of bones. The air was thick with pollen and spores and the smell of growth and decay happening simultaneously. And at the center of the garden sat a figure so vast I couldn't comprehend its boundaries. It was grandfather and mountain and plague, pit all at once. Its skin was split and weeping. Its flesh crawled with maggots and beetles and things that had no names. Its face was kind. That was what broke me. The thing was rotting and massive and wrong in every possible way. But its face was kind. It looked at me with eyes that held the patient love of something that had watched universes grow old and die. And it smiled. It reached for me with a hand whose fingers terminated in glistening bone and said my name. Not Corvus. Not Lieutenant Hale. My true name. The name written in my genes and my destiny. The name I would carry when I finally understood what it meant to be loved. I woke screaming. Sergeant Kane was shaking me, demanding to know what was wrong. I couldn't tell him. Couldn't describe what I'd seen. The words wouldn't form. My mouth tasted like copper and old flowers. My skin itched, but when I checked there was nothing. No rash, no pustules, just pale, sweat-soaked flesh and the certainty that something had changed. Kane handed me my las rifle and told me to take position on the north perimeter. Dawn was coming. The infected had been quiet all night, and that terrified him more than when they were laughing. I took my position next to Private Yang, a hard-faced woman from a hive world whose name I could never pronounce correctly. She didn't look at me, just kept her las rifle trained on the Medicare facility doors and muttered prayers to the Emperor under her breath. I wanted to tell her that the Emperor couldn't hear her. Not here. Not in this place where the veil between reality and the garden was tissue, thin and getting thinner. But I kept my mouth shut and watched the sun rise over the green hell of Verdantis. The infected came out at noon, not breaking through the doors or smashing through windows. They just walked out, calm, smiling. 39 plague victims in rotting Astra Militarum uniforms strolled into the compound like they were heading to morning prayers. Crane screamed the order to fire. We did. Last bolts punched through diseased flesh and burned holes in swollen organs. The infected kept walking. Some of them fell. Most didn't. The ones who did fall just lay there smiling, their bodies breaking open to release clouds of flies and spores that drifted on the breeze toward our positions. Yang was still firing when the first spores reached her. They looked like dandelion seeds, innocent, harmless. One landed on her cheek and her skin began to blister immediately. She dropped her rifle and clawed at her face, screaming, and I grabbed her wrist to pull her back from the perimeter. Her skin came off in my hand, just peeled away like wet paper to reveal the yellow fat and red muscle beneath. She looked at me with absolute terror and understanding. Then the terror faded. The understanding remained. She started laughing. Crane was shouting for a full retreat to the command bunker. 4 of us made it: Kane, myself, Trooper Valdis, and Crane herself. We sealed the blast doors and sat in the darkness listening to the sounds outside. Singing. They were singing, not imperial hymns or regimental marching songs, something older, something that had been sung in the deepest forests of ancient terror before humanity learned to make fire. The words were in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. They were singing about growth, about the beauty of decay, about the gift that was being offered to all living things, about the love of the grandfather who asked nothing but that we accept his embrace and become part of the great cycle. Valdis put his las rifle under his chin and pulled the trigger. His body slumped against the wall. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody looked away when the flies found the seams in the blast door and crawled through to claim his corpse. We lasted 3 days in that bunker. 3 days of darkness and recycled air and the knowledge that we were already dead. We just hadn't stopped moving yet. Kane tried to raise orbital command on every frequency, static and whispers. Crane rationed our remaining water and ration bars with military precision. It didn't matter. We all knew it didn't matter. On the second day, she showed me the rash on her stomach, small red bumps arranged in a perfect circle, 7 of them. She didn't say anything, just pulled her uniform back down and returned to monitoring the Vox. On the third day, Kane started laughing. Not the bubbling wet sound of the infected outside, just laughter. Normal human laughter at something that wasn't funny. He laughed until he cried. Then he laughed some more. Crane shot him. I didn't try to stop her. The flies came. I was alone with her then, and I could see my own death reflected in her yellowing eyes. She told me the truth before the end. She'd been infected in the chapel. That first day, one of the flies had crawled into her ear while we stood frozen. She'd felt it deposit something. Felt the tiny payload of spores and bacteria and warp touched filth being injected directly into her Eustachian tube. She'd said nothing. Done nothing. Because she was a soldier and soldiers don't complain about discomfort. because she thought maybe it was nothing, because she was terrified that if she reported it they'd execute her. So she stayed quiet and the infection grew. Slow. Patient. Nurgle wasn't in a hurry. He had all the time in the universe. She'd been spreading it through her breath, every time she gave an order, through her sweat every time she touched someone. We'd never had a chance. The quarantine was theater. We were all condemned from the moment we entered that chapel. She was crying when she told me this. Not from fear or regret. From gratitude. Because she finally understood. She finally saw the gift for what it was. She put her las pistol in my hand and told me to shoot her or shoot myself. But for the love of the grandfather, don't just sit here waiting. Then she opened the blast door and walked into the green hell beyond. I sat in that bunker for 6 hours after she left. The las pistol was cold in my hand. One shot. That's all it would take. One shot and I'd escape. I'd deny Nurgle his prize. I'd die a loyal servant of the Emperor instead of becoming another plague bearer in the infinite garden. I put the barrel in my mouth, tasted the metal and the machine oil. My finger tightened on the trigger. I thought about the Emperor on his golden throne, rotting in his own way, holding back the darkness through sheer force of will. I thought about the garden and the kind face of the thing that had called my true name. I thought about Crane and Mencken and all the others who had stopped screaming and started singing. The gun felt heavy. My finger felt weak. I lowered the weapon and I wept because I knew I was too much of a coward to pull the trigger. That's what I told myself then. That I was afraid. That I wanted to live even if living meant becoming something monstrous. But that was a lie I told myself to preserve the last shreds of my humanity. The truth was simpler and so much worse. I lowered the gun because I wanted to understand. Because somewhere in the rational, imperial-trained part of my mind, a question had taken root. What if they're right? What if this is a gift? The rash appeared that evening. Small red bumps on my left hand, right between the thumb and forefinger. I watched them develop with a strange detached curiosity. They itched, but not badly. Just enough to remind me they were there. I didn't panic, didn't try to cut the infected flesh away or cauterize it with my las pistol's power cell. I just sat and watched as the bumps became pustules, as the pustules filled with fluid, as my skin took on that first faint hint of discoloration. It was happening slowly. Much more slowly than it had with the others. Later I would understand why. Nurgle was taking his time with me, savoring me, teaching me. That first night of my infection, I dreamed of the garden again, but this time I walked through it. The corpse soil was soft beneath my boots. The organ fruit swayed in a breeze that smelled like medicine and flowers. Small things scurried through the undergrowth, creatures that were part beetle, part mammal, part something that had never been classified by imperial biologists. They watched me pass with compound eyes that held a spark of terrible intelligence. And ahead, at the center of the garden where the trees grew thickest, I saw the others. My company, my regiment, standing in a circle around the vast, rotting figure that called itself grandfather. They were singing. I joined them. When I woke, I was outside the bunker. I had no memory of opening the blast door or walking through the compound. But there I was, standing in the ruins of New Prosperity, with the dawn sun warm on my diseased skin. The settlement had changed. Or maybe I was seeing it clearly for the first time. The buildings hadn't collapsed. They'd been repurposed. Vines and fungi and things that were neither plant nor animal had claimed every surface, turning ferrocrete and plasteel into organic structures that pulsed gently as though breathing. The streets were carpeted with moss that gave off a soft bioluminescent glow. The air was thick with spores that caught the light and made everything look like it was underwater. And everywhere were the flies. They moved in rivers through the air. They clustered on every surface. They sang in their billions, a droning chorus that I realized with creeping horror was music, complex, layered, Beautiful. I started walking, not because I chose to, because my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the chapel where this had all begun. The chapel had been transformed into something magnificent and obscene. The walls wept with condensation that ran in streams down stone covered in pale fungi shaped like grasping hands. The floor was ankle, deep in what looked like mulch but moved sluggishly, processing the organic matter that fed it into nutrients that fed the growths climbing the walls. The statue I remembered, the one with its face chiseled away and replaced with that too wide smile, was gone. In its place stood something that might have been built or might have grown naturally from the corrupted ground. A throne, massive, constructed from interwoven bones and still, living wood and metal that had been infected with rust and decay, until it had become a hybrid material that shouldn't exist. And sitting on that throne was Medica Crane. She looked at me with eyes that had gone completely black. Her skin was more green than flesh-colored now. Her fingers had split at the tips to reveal bone that had been sharpened to points. Her smile was genuinely warm. She rose from the throne and walked to me, and I smelled roses and gangrene in equal measure. She touched my face with one ruined hand, and I felt the infection surge through my body. Not violently, gently, like a parent tucking a child into bed. The pustules on my hand burst and wept. More appeared on my arms, my chest, my neck. My skin began to change color, taking on those beautiful mottled hues of purple and green and yellow. My muscles shifted beneath my flesh, reorganizing themselves into something more efficient. My bones thickened. My organs rearranged. I should have been screaming, should have been fighting, but I wasn't, because it didn't hurt. That's the thing nobody tells you about Nurgle's gift. It doesn't hurt. The transformation is gentle, patient, almost loving. My body was being remade into something that could survive conditions that would kill an unmodified human instantly. My immune system was being replaced with something that didn't fight disease but incorporated it, made it part of me, turned every virus and bacterium into a tool I could use. I was becoming something greater than human, something blessed. Crane leaned in close and whispered in my ear, her breath hot and smelling of wet earth. She told me the truth about Nurgle. She told me things that would see me executed by the Inquisition if I ever spoke them aloud in Imperial space. She told me that the Plague God wasn't evil, that concepts like good and evil were illusions created by minds too small to understand the grand cycles of existence, that Nurgle represented something fundamental to reality itself: change, growth, decay, death, rebirth. He was the god of the cycle that drove all living things. He asked only that his children embrace that cycle instead of fearing it, that they find joy in transformation instead of clinging to the illusion of permanence, that they love themselves and each other in sickness as much as in health. It was a sermon, a liturgy of rot, and every word made perfect sense. I don't know how long I stood there listening to her speak. Time had become fluid, meaningless. When she finally stepped back, I looked down at my hands and saw that they had changed. The flesh was bloated, swollen with fluids and gases that my body now produced naturally. The fingers were thicker, stronger, the nails blackened and ready to fall away to reveal the claws growing beneath. My uniform hung in tatters from a body that was both larger and somehow denser than it had been. I touched my face and felt the pustules there, dozens of them, weeping a fluid that didn't burn or sting but felt cool and soothing against my transformed skin. I was hideous. I was glorious. I was exactly what I was meant to be. Crane took my hand and led me deeper into the chapel, past the throne, through a doorway that hadn't existed before. We descended, down through levels that shouldn't have fit beneath a small colonial chapel, down through chambers where the walls were lined with cocoons made of solidified pus and mucus, each one containing a transforming body that twitched and dreamed of the garden, down through halls where servitors that had been infected and transformed wandered aimlessly, their mechanical components fused with diseased flesh in configurations that were somehow functional. Down to the very bottom, where the earth itself had been carved into a vast chamber lit by phosphorescent fungi and filled with hundreds, thousands of the infected. My regiment was there, every trooper, every officer. I saw Kane standing near the front, his body so transformed I barely recognized him. I saw Mencken, who should have been dead from Crane's bolt, round but was instead very much alive, his head a mass of scar tissue and exposed bone that had been colonized by mushrooms. I saw faces I'd known for years, rendered strange and beautiful by Nurgle's touch. They were all smiling. They were all happy, and standing at the center of that vast crowd, teaching them the words to songs that predated human civilization, were the colonists. 15,000 souls who hadn't vanished but had ascended. They had found the garden first, had drunk deep of its gifts, had transformed into something beyond human. They were prophets now, missionaries, spreading the word of the grandfather's love to all who would listen. One of them saw me and approached. He had been a man once. Now he was an architecture of disease given purpose. His body hosted 7 distinct plagues, each one visible as a different colored patch of discolored flesh. His eyes wept constantly, but his smile never wavered. He told me his name had been Marcus Cole, settlement administrator. He told me he had fought the infection at first, had tried to save his people, had prayed to the Emperor for deliverance, but the Emperor hadn't answered. The Emperor never answered, too busy rotting on his own throne, holding back the darkness while his subjects suffered and died in his name. But Grandfather had answered. Grandfather always answered. All Marcus had to do was stop fighting and start listening. He led me to the center of the chamber, where a pool had been dug into the earth. The liquid inside was thick and greenish-brown, somewhere between mud and pus in consistency. Things moved beneath the surface. I could see tentacles or possibly intestines breaching and submerging in lazy waves. Marcus told me this was the final baptism, that my transformation was incomplete, that I had accepted the gift intellectually but not spiritually, that I needed to immerse myself fully in Nurgle's embrace if I wanted to truly understand. I looked at that pool of filth, and I felt no revulsion, no fear, just curiosity, just a desire to know what lay beneath that opaque surface. I stepped to the edge. The crowd behind me had gone silent, waiting, watching. I could feel their anticipation like physical pressure against my back. I took off what remained of my uniform and stood naked before them, my transformed body on display. The pustules wept. The discolored flesh rippled. The creatures living in my gut moved restlessly, sending strange sensations through my abdomen. I stepped into the pool. The liquid was warm, body temperature. It clung to my skin like syrup, and I felt it seeping into my pores, into the pustules, into every opening and wound. I took another step and it was up to my knees. Another and it reached my waist. The things beneath the surface were active now. I felt them brush against my legs, felt tentacles or appendages wrap gently around my ankles, not restraining but guiding, welcoming. I kept walking until the pool was up to my chest, then my neck. Then I took a breath and submerged completely. The liquid filled my nose, my mouth, my lungs. I should have drowned. Instead, I breathed. The fluids in the pool carried oxygen in a form my transformed physiology could process. I hung there in the warm darkness, suspended in filth that was also amniotic fluid, and I felt the final pieces of my transformation lock into place. My mind expanded, not with madness, but with understanding. I could feel the garden now, even when I wasn't dreaming, could feel its roots extending through the warp and into real space, touching every world where life grew and died and was reborn. Could feel the grandfather's attention, vast and patient and infinitely loving, resting on me like the gentlest pressure. I was his child. I had always been his child. The Imperium had been a lie. The Emperor had been a mistake. This was truth. This was home. When I emerged from the pool, I was no longer Lieutenant Corvus Hale of the 3rd Mordian Iron Guard. That man had died in a chapel 5 days ago. He just hadn't had the grace to stop moving until now. I was something new. Something better. The crowd welcomed me with song and I joined them, my voice harmonizing with theirs in ways that should have been impossible. We sang for hours, for days. Time meant nothing. We sang praises to the grandfather who had freed us from the tyranny of false hope. We sang of the beauty of decay and the joy of transformation. We sang of the garden and its infinite wonders. And as we sang, I felt something change in the air around us. The warp was thin here. Nurgle's influence had weakened the barriers between realities until they were like tissue paper ready to tear. I understood then what we were doing. We weren't just celebrating our transformation. We were preparing, building power, thinning the veil further, getting ready to spread the gift beyond Verdantis to every world in this sector and beyond. We were the first wave, the missionaries, the blessed, and we would not stop until every living thing had been offered the grandfather's embrace. The Imperium came eventually. They always do. 3 months after I stepped into that pool, orbital sensors detected what they called a corruption event. An Inquisitor arrived with 2 companies of Space Marines, chapter unknown, armor painted white and decorated with symbols of purity. They made planetfall in force. They didn't negotiate, didn't investigate, just started burning. Their flamers turned the forests to ash. Their bolters turned the infected to meat. Their chaplains sang hymns to the Emperor as they committed genocide in his name. We didn't fight back. We didn't need to. We welcomed them with open arms and pustule, weeping skin. We showed them the garden. Some broke immediately, put their bolters in their mouths, and pulled the triggers rather than face the truth of what they'd seen. Others fought harder, their faith turning to desperate rage as they realized that faith alone wouldn't save them. A few, just a few, stopped fighting, lowered their weapons, removed their helmets, and listened. The Inquisitor called for orbital bombardment when he realized what was happening. Cyclonic torpedoes, virus bombs, everything they had. The ships in orbit received his orders and acknowledged, but the torpedoes never came, because the infection had spread further than anyone realized. The colonists hadn't vanished. They'd left, in 1s and 2s, smuggled aboard trading ships and pilgrim vessels. They'd spread to other worlds, to orbital stations, to the ships themselves. By the time the Inquisitor called for exterminatus, half the fleet was already singing grandfather's songs. I watched from the surface as the Imperial ships turned on each other, watched as vessels that had served the Emperor for centuries opened fire on their battle brothers, watched as escape pods and boarding craft launched in desperate attempts to flee or fight. Some of the ships broke orbit, ran for the system's edge and the warp routes beyond. They'd carry the gift with them, spread it to new sectors, new systems, new worlds. Others crashed into Verdantis' surface, adding their crews to our growing congregation. The Space Marines fought to the last. Emperor blessed them. They fought with a fury and determination that would have inspired epic poetry in another age. But fury and determination aren't enough when you're fighting biology itself. When every breath you take carries spores into your lungs. When every wound you inflict releases clouds of infection into the air. When every fallen enemy rises again as a vector for the very disease you're trying to eradicate. The last Marine lasted 4 days. I watched him make his final stand in the ruins of our forward operating base, bolter firing until the ammunition was gone, then switching to his chainsword, then to his bare hands. He killed hundreds of us. It didn't matter. There were always more. When he finally fell, not from wounds but from exhaustion and the infection that had been eating him from inside, we carried him to the chapel, to the pool. He emerged transformed. The grandfather had found his faith beautiful and rewarded him accordingly. He serves as one of our champions now. The Imperium's finest, remade into something greater. You want to know what it's like, don't you? To rot alive. To feel your body break down and rebuild itself into something that shouldn't exist but does. I've tried to explain it in terms you'd understand. But words are inadequate. They're tools designed by healthy minds to describe healthy experiences, and there's nothing healthy about what I've become. Let me try anyway. It's like this. Imagine every nerve in your body firing at once. Not with pain, with sensation. Pure intense sensation that your brain interprets as everything simultaneously. Pleasure, heat, cold pressure, release. Now imagine that sensation is constant, always there, always changing. Your skin is a map of competing impulses, each pustule and lesion and patch of discolored flesh sending its own unique signal to your brain. You learn to read them, to understand what each sensation means. This cluster of boils on your forearm means you're producing a new strain of bacterial infection that will be highly contagious to anyone with an intact immune system. This patch of necrotic tissue on your shoulder is processing and recycling dead cells into nutrients for the symbiotic organisms living in your gut. This weeping sore on your neck is a sensory organ now, capable of detecting chemical signatures in the air that will tell you if potential hosts are nearby. Your sense of smell becomes overwhelming, not in a bad way, in a comprehensive way. You can smell everything. The subtle decay happening in the wood of a building, the specific chemical composition of someone's sweat, the pheromones released by plants under stress, the particular bacterial strains colonizing a piece of rotting meat. Every scent carries information, and you process all of it constantly, building a three-dimensional olfactory map of your environment that's more detailed than anything your eyes could show you. Your hearing changes too. The flies aren't just buzzing anymore. They're talking, communicating in a language made of vibration and frequency. You understand them. You can call them, direct them. They're not separate from you. They're extensions of your will, the way your fingers are extensions of your arm. You feel what they feel when they land on something. Taste what they taste when they feed. They're your scouts, your soldiers, your children. And they love you the way you love grandfather. Food becomes unnecessary but not unwanted. You can eat if you choose to. Your transformed digestive system can process nearly anything organic and extract nutrients from materials that would poison a normal human. Rotten meat tastes sweet. Spoiled milk is refreshing. The fungi that grow in damp places have flavors that would make the finest imperial chefs weep with envy. But you don't need to eat. Your body has become efficient in ways that defy imperial biologists' understanding. You photosynthesize. The fungi and algae living in your skin and just beneath it convert light into energy. You absorb nutrients from the air itself, filtering out the organic particles and spores that fill every breath. You recycle your own waste products internally, processing and reprocessing until there's nothing left to excrete. You are a closed ecosystem, self-sufficient, perfect. But the greatest change, the one that defines the experience of being blessed by Nurgle, is emotional. You feel love. Constant, overwhelming, unconditional love. For yourself. For the other blessed. For the unblessed who haven't yet received the gift. For the universe itself in all its rotting, growing, dying, living glory. That's what the Imperium doesn't understand. That's what they call corruption and madness. We call it enlightenment. We call it joy. The nightmares stopped. That's worth mentioning. I spent 20 years in the Astra Militarum. 20 years of watching friends die. 20 years of killing the Imperium's enemies, and sometimes its friends when the orders came down wrong or the commissar got nervous. 20 years of sleeping 3 hours a night because every time I closed my eyes I saw faces, heard screams, relived moments of violence that had carved themselves into my psyche like scars. The nightmares stopped the moment I accepted Nurgle's gift. I sleep now. Really sleep. Deep and dreamless except when grandfather calls me to the garden And those aren't nightmares. Those are lessons, instructions, love given form. I wake up happy. Every single morning. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious? I spent my entire adult life depressed and anxious and traumatized by the things I'd seen and done in the Emperor's name. All of it gone, washed away in a pool of sacred filth, replaced with contentment and purpose, and the certainty that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. We're spreading. That's the other thing you need to understand. Verdantis was just the beginning, a test case, proof of concept. Nurgle's garden has taken root in this sector and it's growing. 12 worlds now bear his mark. 12 worlds where the populations have been blessed and transformed. The Imperium knows. They're mobilizing, calling in favors, redirecting fleets from other war zones. An entire crusade is being organized to purge what they're calling the verdant sector of corruption. They'll bring millions of soldiers, thousands of ships. They'll burn worlds to cinders and call it righteousness. And it won't matter. Because for every world they burn, will infect 2 more. For every soldier they send, 10 more will hear the garden's song and lay down their weapons. This isn't a war that can be won with bolters and faith. This is biology. This is inevitability. This is the galaxy's immune system recognizing the Imperium as the true disease and working to purge it. I lead a congregation now. 300 blessed souls who follow me through the ruins of worlds the Imperium abandoned long before we arrived. We don't conquer. We don't destroy. We simply walk through the wreckage of the Emperor's dream and offer an alternative to those who remain. The forgotten, the abandoned, the ones who prayed for salvation that never came, they always listen. Always. Because we don't demand their faith. We don't threaten them with damnation. We show them the truth of their condition, rotting in the service of a corpse. God who can't hear their prayers, and then we offer them something better. We offer them joy. The choice is always theirs. Some refuse. We don't force them. Nurgle's gift cannot be taken by violence. It must be accepted willingly, with understanding and love. Those who refuse we leave behind. They usually change their minds within a few days. When they're alone again. When they remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than themselves, even if only for a moment. When the silence becomes unbearable. They come looking for us. They always do. There's a hierarchy developing among the blessed, not imperial rank structure with its rigid protocols and arbitrary divisions. Something organic, natural. Those who transformed early, who had more time to marinate in grandfather's love, have become something greater. Their bodies have continued to evolve, growing larger, more resilient, hosting more diverse collections of diseases and symbiotic organisms. They're called Plague Marines by the Imperials. Though we don't use that term, we call them the Elders. The first blessed, they teach the newly transformed. Help them navigate the early stages of change when the sensation is overwhelming and the old human instincts still scream that something is wrong. Crane is an elder now. Her body has grown to nearly 3 meters tall. Her skin has taken on the texture of tree bark, thick and ridged and covered in shelf fungi that pulse with bioluminescent patterns. 7 Nurglings live in her body cavity, visible through a gap in her ribs that never quite healed. They're small, playful things, manifestations of Nurgle's aspect as the grandfather who delights in children. They peek out at the world with curious eyes and giggle at jokes only they can hear. Crane loves them, feeds them scraps of diseased flesh and rotten fruit, tells them stories about the Imperium she used to serve and laughs at how foolish she'd been. I'm changing too, slower than Crane, but inexorably. My body is adapting to my role as shepherd and teacher. My voice has become deeper, resonant in ways that make others want to listen when I speak. The diseases I carry are less virulent than those of the elders but more communicable. My very presence weakens the immune systems of those nearby, making them more receptive to the gift when it's finally offered. Nurglings have started following me. Not living inside me yet, but orbiting me like small grotesque moons. They appear from nowhere when I'm teaching and arrange themselves around my feet, listening with rapt attention. Sometimes they repeat my words in their high squeaky voices. Sometimes they elaborate on points I've made with insights that could only come from grandfather himself. They're annoying and endearing in equal measure. I've grown fond of them. The Imperium's response has been predictable and pathetic. They established a quarantine zone around the Verdant sector. Any ship attempting to leave is destroyed immediately, no questions asked. No mercy given. They're burning their own people by the millions to contain what they can't cure. It won't work. The infection is already beyond their quarantine, already spreading through the merchant routes and pilgrim paths that connect the Imperium's millions of worlds. You can't quarantine an idea, and that's what Nurgle's gift really is. Not a disease, an idea. The idea that maybe the suffering doesn't have to be meaningless. That maybe the decay is natural and the fight against it is what's unnatural. That maybe the Emperor's promise of salvation was always a lie, and there's something else out there, something patient and loving, waiting for humanity to stop struggling and accept its embrace. That idea is more contagious than any virus. It spreads through conversations, through moments of doubt, through the quiet hours when soldiers lie awake, wondering why they're fighting and dying for an Imperium that treats them as ammunition. We don't need to infect everyone physically. We just need to plant the idea, let it germinate, watch it grow. I met an Inquisitor once. After my transformation, after I'd become what I am now, his warband had tracked our congregation to a dead hive world on the sector's edge. He came alone to parley, which showed either incredible courage or suicidal stupidity. Probably both. His name was Vicarius Thone. Young for an Inquisitor, maybe 60 standard years. Augmetics covered half his face, legacy of some past battle. He wore his authority like armor, every word and gesture carefully calculated to project power and righteousness. He stood at the entrance to our chapel. This structure we'd grown from a combination of organic matter and scavenged building materials, and he demanded I explain myself, demanded I justify the corruption of imperial citizens, demanded I recant and beg the Emperor's forgiveness. I invited him in for tea. That confused him. You could see it in his eyes, the cognitive dissonance of a monster offering hospitality. But curiosity won out over caution, the way it always does with Inquisitors. They can't help themselves. They need to understand the enemy, even if understanding damns them. We sat in my personal chamber, a small room where the walls breathed gently and phosphorescent moss provided soft light. I served him tea brewed from fungi that grew in the chapel's deepest levels. He didn't drink it, though I could see the temptation. The aroma was exquisite. I told him my story, all of it, Verdantis, the infection, the transformation, the peace I'd found in Nurgle's embrace. He listened without interrupting, which surprised me. When I finished, he sat silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. He asked why. Why would I abandon the Emperor? Why would I embrace corruption? Why would I help spread a plague that would kill billions? I told him he was asking the wrong questions, that the Emperor had abandoned humanity long before I abandoned the Emperor. That what the Imperium calls corruption is actually evolution, that the plague wouldn't kill billions, it would save them from a meaningless death in the Emperor's service. He called me a heretic, a traitor, a fool. I agreed with all three assessments and asked if he'd like more tea. He wanted to kill me. I could see it in the tension of his jaw, the way his hand kept drifting toward the bolt pistol holstered at his hip. But he didn't draw. Couldn't draw, because somewhere in our conversation, doubt had taken root in his mind. I hadn't argued with his faith, hadn't tried to disprove the Emperor's divinity. I just offered an alternative perspective, asked him to consider the possibility That the Imperium's suffering wasn't noble sacrifice, but pointless waste. That the Emperor might be powerful, but that didn't make him good. That 10,000 years of stagnation and decay should tell humanity something about the viability of the imperial model. He left without drinking the tea, without shooting me, without calling down an orbital strike on our position. He just left. I never saw him again, but 6 months later we received word that Inquisitor Thone had been declared excommunicate traitoris and executed by his own order. His last words, according to the reports, were a prayer to the Plague God. I like to think our conversation planted the seed that eventually flowered into his damnation. I like to think he died happy, finally free of the burden of serving a god who couldn't love him back. The physical sensation of rotting alive is difficult to convey to someone who hasn't experienced it. I've tried to describe the symptoms, the changes, the transformations, but those are just words, clinical descriptions that fail to capture the actual experience. Let me try again, differently. Your body is a house you've lived in your whole life. You know every room, every creak and groan. You know which floorboards to avoid because they squeak. You know where the draft comes through in winter. It's familiar, comfortable. Then Nurgle's gift arrives and suddenly your house starts changing. Walls shift, new rooms appear. The basement gets deeper. The attic extends into dimensions that shouldn't exist. At first it's terrifying. Nothing is where you expect it to be. The familiar landmarks are gone or transformed into something unrecognizable. You want to fight it. Want to force everything back to how it was, but you can't. The changes are too profound, too fundamental. So you adapt. You start exploring the new rooms. You discover that the changes aren't random, they're improvements. That basement goes down into rich dark soil where things grow that you never imagined. That attic opens onto vistas of rot and renewal that take your breath away. The house is better now. More functional. More beautiful in its wrongness. You realize the old familiar version was actually cramped and limiting. This new configuration is what the house was always meant to be. Your consciousness changes too. That might be the most significant transformation. The Imperium conditions its citizens to think in certain ways, to accept certain truths without question. The Emperor is good. The Imperium is necessary. Suffering is noble. Alien life is abhorrent. Chaos is evil. These aren't reasoned positions. They're programming, installed early and reinforced constantly through prayer and propaganda and punishment. Nurgle's gift breaks that programming, not violently, not through madness or possession. It just removes the walls, lets you see the ideas you've always held without actually examining them, lets you question. And once you start questioning, really questioning, the entire edifice of imperial faith collapses, because it can't withstand scrutiny. It's built on lies and maintained through ignorance. The Emperor isn't good, he's powerful, and those aren't the same thing. The Imperium isn't necessary, it's just enormous and entrenched. Suffering isn't noble, it's just suffering. Alien life is different, not inherently evil. And chaos. Chaos is just another aspect of reality. Another way of being. Neither good nor evil, just different. The relief that comes with that understanding is indescribable. 40 years of cognitive dissonance resolved. 40 years of trying to make sense of contradictions ended. Everything is clear now. Simple. True. We don't hate the Imperium. That's important to understand. We pity it. The way you might pity a sick animal that's suffering but doesn't understand what's wrong or how to heal. The Imperium is diseased with the worst kind of sickness. The sickness of false hope. They believe if they just fight hard enough, sacrifice enough, maintain faith long enough, the Emperor will rise from his throne and lead them to victory. But he won't, can't. He's trapped in a prison of his own making, sustained by the psychic death, screams of thousands of psychers every day, barely conscious, incapable of communication or growth or change. He's been rotting on that throne for 10 millennia, and will continue rotting for 10 millennia more. The Imperium worships decay while condemning it. They've built their entire civilization around the veneration of a rotting corpse, and then they call us corrupt for accepting decay as natural. The hypocrisy would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. We want to free them from that trap. Want to show them there's another way. A path where decay is accepted and transformed into something beautiful instead of feared and fought. Where death is seen as part of the cycle instead of an ending. Where suffering has meaning because it leads to growth and transformation. The crusade arrived eventually, 8 months after Verdantis fell. 3 years after the first outlying worlds accepted the gift. They came in force, 17 capital ships, 43 escorts, 200 transport vessels carrying 18 regiments of Astra Militarum, and 3 companies of space marines from a chapter I didn't recognize. The fleet commander, an admiral whose name I never learned, broadcast a warning to every planet in the sector. They called us traitors and heretics. They promised cleansing fire. They swore by the Emperor that not one infected soul would survive their purge. Then they opened fire on the outermost planet in our sector, a small agricultural world that had accepted Nurgle's gift 6 months prior. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. When it was done, the planet's surface was molten glass. 7 million blessed souls returned to the garden that day. I felt every death. We all did, not as pain, as loss. As the severing of connections that had linked us to brothers and sisters in the congregation. The fleet moved to the next world, and we prepared to teach them the futility of their crusade. The fleet's rotting from within was expected. We had blessed among the crew of nearly every ship converts from earlier contact with infected vessels or planets. Sleeper agents who had sailed with the crusade fleet, waiting for the right moment to act. They struck 3 days into the campaign, simultaneously across 17 capital ships, sabotaged life support systems to release spores from carefully hidden cultivation chambers, contaminated water supplies, infected food stocks. The fleet's medical facilities were overwhelmed within hours. Quarantine protocols failed because the people enforcing them were already infected. The ships turned into floating petri dishes, perfect environments for Nurgle's gift to spread and flourish. Some vessels managed to purge the infection through brutal measures, venting entire decks to space, executing anyone who showed symptoms, burning their own crew alive in the corridors. Those ships broke orbit and ran, carrying their trauma back to the Imperium's core worlds where they'd spread both the infection and stories of our power. The others succumbed, 8 capital ships, 21 escorts, 98 transport vessels, crews totaling over 200,000 souls, all blessed, all singing, all ready to turn their weapons on the loyalist remnants of the fleet. The space battle that followed was brief and one-sided. The infected vessels had better positioning and more ships. They crippled or destroyed what remained of the Crusade fleet within 6 hours. The surviving Imperial ships managed to evacuate approximately 40,000 personnel to the planet below before being destroyed. Those 40,000, a mix of Astra Militarum and Space Marines, established a beachhead and prepared for a ground campaign. They had supplies for 3 months. They had faith in the Emperor. They had some of the finest warriors humanity could produce. They lasted 2 weeks. Not because we killed them, because we talked to them. We sent emissaries under flags of truce, blessed who had been Astra Militarum themselves, who understood the grinding horror of service in the Imperial military. They spoke to the soldiers in the trenches, reminded them of every promise the Imperium had broken, every friend who'd died meaninglessly, every order that had made no sense. Every moment they'd questioned why they were fighting. Then they showed them the alternative. Showed them the joy and peace that came with acceptance. Showed them what it meant to serve a God who actually cared about their well-being instead of just their utility. The first defections happened on day 4. small groups at first, a squad here, a platoon there. Soldiers who walked out of their trenches with weapons lowered and asked to hear more. The command structure tried to stop it. Commissars executed deserters. Officers gave inspiring speeches about duty and honor. The Space Marines led by example, standing at their posts even as their Imperial Guard allies wavered. But you can't execute everyone. You can't shoot your entire army to maintain discipline. By day 10, entire companies were defecting. The Space Marines fought to the end. Emperor bless them, they always do. Transhuman warriors conditioned from childhood to know no fear, no doubt, no mercy. We took no pleasure in killing them. Each one was a tragedy, a soul too damaged by Imperial conditioning to accept healing. But they gave us no choice. When the last Marine fell, his armor cracked and his enhanced body finally overwhelmed by diseases that would have killed a normal human in seconds. We honored him, burned his body with sacred oils, sang prayers for his recycling into the great cycle. Then we welcomed the 40,000 survivors into the congregation. The crusade meant to purge us had instead swelled our numbers beyond anything we'd hoped. Terror knows. The Inquisition knows. The High Lords know. Reports have reached the heart of the Imperium describing what's happening in the Verdant sector. They're debating their response now. Some want to send another crusade, larger, better prepared. Others advocate for containment, establishing a permanent quarantine and accepting the loss of the sector as acceptable shrinkage. A few, the ones who understand the true scope of what's happening, are calling for exterminatus on every world we've touched. Cyclonic torpedoes, virus bombs, atmospheric incinerators. Burn it all and damn the cost. They won't do it. Can't do it. The Imperium is spread too thin, fighting too many wars on too many fronts. They don't have the resources to sterilize an entire sector. Don't have the will to write off billions of citizens. Don't have the time to debate endlessly while we continue to spread. So they'll do what they always do. Half measures, token resistance. Performative shows of force meant to reassure the faithful that the Imperium is handling the problem. And while they dither and debate, will infect another world, and another, and another. I'm writing this on a data slate I recovered from a dead inquisitorial agent. Strange that I still remember how to use Imperial technology. That I retain the muscle memory and cognitive pathways of my former life. The transformation is profound but not total. I'm still Corvus Hale in some fundamental way, even if I'm also so much more. I'm writing this because I want there to be a record. Something for future scholars to find and study when the Verdant sector has become the Verdant segmentum. When Nurgle's garden has taken root across the galaxy, I want them to understand that we weren't monsters, weren't mad. We were just people who found a better way, who chose joy over suffering, who accepted the truth of decay instead of fighting against the inevitable. I want them to know it didn't hurt, that we welcomed the changes even when they terrified us, that we found beauty in rot and love in corruption, that we became something greater than human and found that greater was better. If you're reading this, whoever you are, whenever you are, know that the offer is still open. Nurgle's gift is available to all living things. You don't have to be special. Don't have to be chosen. You just have to stop fighting. Stop clinging to the illusion that permanence is possible or desirable. Open yourself to change. Accept that your body is already rotting, has been since the moment you were born, and that rotting is beautiful. Let go of the fear. Let go of the disgust. Let go of everything the Imperium taught you about purity and corruption and righteousness. Just let go. The garden is waiting. Grandfather is waiting. We're all waiting, and we love you already, exactly as you are, exactly as you'll become. All you have to do is take the first step. The pustules on my hand are weeping as I write this, clear fluid beading on diseased skin and running down to stain the data slate's keys. I should probably stop. Preserve the device while it still functions. But I find I don't want to. There's something satisfying about leaving my mark on every word. Something appropriate about contaminating even this record with physical evidence of what I've become. Let whoever finds this slate also receive the gift it carries. Let the spores dried in the fluid between the keys germinate when moisture reactivates them. Let this testimony serve double duty as vector and scripture. That feels right. Grandfather would approve. We're moving soon. The congregation is growing too large for this dead hive world. We need more space, more resources, more potential converts. There's a shrine world 3 systems over. Septimus Sanctus, population 40 million. Devoted entirely to the worship of a saint whose bones are interred in a massive cathedral at the equator. Pilgrims come from across the sector to pray at her tomb, to seek blessings and miracles. They'll find miracles, just not the kind they expected. We'll arrive as pilgrims ourselves, diseased but not yet transformed to the point of obvious corruption. We'll pray alongside the faithful. We'll take communion at the cathedral services. We'll contaminate the holy water and the sacramental wine. We'll breathe our spores into the recycled air of the shrine complexes. And within a month, Septimus Sanctus will be Septimus Blessed. 40 million new souls joining the congregation. 40 million voices raised in praise of the Grandfather. The Imperium will lose another world and won't even know it until the transformation is complete and irreversible. I think about my old life sometimes. Before Verdantis, before the gift, I remember the man I was. Lieutenant Corvus Hale, professional soldier, loyal servant of the Emperor, haunted by nightmares and grinding through each day on discipline and duty alone. That man seems like a stranger now, someone I knew briefly but never understood. I pity him. He was in so much pain and didn't even recognize it as pain. Thought it was normal. Thought everyone felt that way. The depression, the anxiety, the bone, deep exhaustion that came from fighting a war with no end against enemies that would never stop coming. He thought that was just life, just the price of service. He never knew it could be different, never imagined a world where he woke up happy and went to sleep content, never dreamed of a peace that came from acceptance instead of victory. I wish I could go back and tell him, show him what was waiting if he just stopped fighting and listened. But maybe he wouldn't have understood. Maybe he needed to walk the whole path, experience the horror and the transformation and the revelation. Maybe the only way to reach the garden is to go through hell first. The flies are gathering. I can hear them outside my chamber, their buzzing growing louder as they swarm in the corridors. They know we're preparing to leave. They're excited. They love movement, love spreading, love carrying the gift to new places and new hosts. They're messengers and soldiers and children all at once. Perfect little creatures that exist only to serve Grandfather's will. I call to them and they respond, flowing through the doorway in a living river of wings and compound eyes. They land on my skin, my clothes, the data slate, crawling, tasting, sharing information through pheromones and touch. They tell me the fleet is ready. 8 infected vessels, former Imperial Navy ships turned to Nurgle's service. They tell me the congregation is assembled. 3,000 blessed souls ready to spread across the stars. They tell me the warp routes are clear and the garden's influence is strong. We can leave whenever I give the order. I tell them soon. Tell them to prepare. Tell them to sing the songs that will guide us through the immaterium. They swirl around my head in acknowledgement, then flow back out into the corridors to spread the word. I should end this soon. We have a schedule to keep, a shrine world to bless, a sector to transform. But I find myself reluctant to stop writing. This has been cathartic, therapeutic, a chance to organize my thoughts and examine my journey from loyal Imperial soldier to blessed plague bearer. I've tried to be honest, tried to convey not just what happened but what it felt like. Whether I've succeeded, I don't know. Words are inadequate tools for describing the indescribable. How do you explain color to someone born blind? How do you convey the taste of rot to someone who's only known sweetness? How do you make someone understand that dying and transformation are the same thing when they've been taught their entire lives that death is an ending? I've done my best. That's all anyone can do. If you're reading this and feeling horrified, good. Horror is the first step toward understanding. The Imperium has trained you to feel disgust and revulsion at anything that challenges its orthodoxy. That's a defense mechanism, a wall built around your mind to keep you from questioning. Feel the horror. Sit with it. Examine it. Ask yourself why you're horrified. Is it because what I'm describing is objectively wrong? Or is it because it contradicts everything you've been taught to believe? Is your revulsion rational, or is it programming? These are uncomfortable questions. The Imperium doesn't want you asking them, but I do, because questions lead to doubt. Doubt leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to investigation, and investigation, if pursued honestly, leads to the garden. Not everyone who questions ends up blessed. Free will is real and choice matters. But everyone who ends up blessed started with questions. Started with doubt. Started with the courage to look at what they'd been taught and asked, what if this is wrong? The transformation is beginning again. I can feel it. My body is changing, adapting to my new role as fleet commander and prophet. My skin is thickening further. Bone plates are forming beneath the flesh. Natural armor that will let me survive conditions that would kill an unaugmented human. My lungs are restructuring, developing additional chambers that will process different atmospheric compositions. My digestive system is simplifying as my dependence on physical food decreases. I'm becoming streamlined, efficient. Purpose, built for survival and propagation of the gift. It doesn't hurt, never hurts. Just a constant low-level sensation of shift and change. Like growing pains but pleasurable instead of painful. My body knows what it's doing. Knows what it needs to become. I trust it completely. Trust grandfather's design, trust the process. In a few months, I probably won't be recognizable as the man who wrote the earlier parts of this testimony. In a few years, I might not be recognizable as human. That thought doesn't frighten me. It excites me. I want to see what I'll become. Want to discover what shape I'll take when the transformation is complete. The Nurglings are back. 3 of them this time, having manifested from somewhere to keep me company while I write. They perch on my shoulders and lap, reading over my shoulder, occasionally pointing at the screen and giggling at turns of phrase they find particularly amusing. They're not corporeal in the way the flies are, not entirely. They exist partially in the garden and partially in real space. Quantum entities that collapse into solidity when observed and dissolve into probability when ignored. They're fragments of Nurgle himself, tiny pieces of the grandfather's consciousness given independence and personality. Talking to them is like talking to a child who's also infinitely old. They know things I don't, see connections I can't, understand the grand cycle in ways my still, partially human brain can't process. But they communicate through giggles and games and cryptic hints, rather than straightforward explanation. It's endearing and frustrating in equal measure. One of them is chewing on the stylus I'm using to write. Another is trying to braid the tentacles that have started growing from my scalp. The third is asleep, curled into a ball against my stomach, snoring softly. I wouldn't trade them for anything. We're leaving tomorrow. That's the decision I've just made. Tonight we rest and prepare. Tomorrow we board the ships and translate into the warp. 3 days travel to Septimus Sanctus if the currents are favorable. A week if they're not. Then the real work begins. The infiltration, the contamination, the conversion. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing the cathedral and imagining how beautiful it will be when the garden claims it. Looking forward to meeting the pilgrims and hearing their stories and offering them something better than the cold comfort of imperial faith. looking forward to watching a world transform from sterile piety to vibrant decay. It will be glorious. It will be beautiful. It will be an offering to Grandfather that will make him proud. And when Septimus Sanctus falls, when 40 million voices join our triad, we'll move on to the next world. And the next, and the next. We won't stop. Can't stop. The great work is never finished. There are always more souls to bless. Always more worlds to transform. Always more love to share. I'm ending this now. The data, Slate's power cell, is failing anyway. I've said what I needed to say. Made my testimony. Left my mark. Whoever finds this, know that I was happy when I wrote it. Know that I regret nothing. Know that the path I walked, from loyal soldier to blessed plague bearer, was the best decision I ever made. Know that the offer extends to you. The garden is waiting. Grandfather is patient, and we are everywhere, spreading through the Imperium like blessed contagion, offering freedom to those who've known only servitude. You can join us. You can resist us. You can try to destroy us. The choice is yours and yours alone. But know this: the rot is coming. The transformation is inevitable. The cycle continues whether you accept it or fight it. The only question is whether you'll embrace the change with joy or resist it with fear. I know which I chose. I know which brought me peace. The rest is up to you. Nurgle's blessing upon you, reader. May you find what you're looking for, even if you don't yet know what that is. May your suffering end. May your transformation begin. May you rot with joy. Lieutenant Corvus Hale, first blessed of Verdantis, signing off. The garden grows, the grandfather watches, the gift spreads, all is well, all is rot, all is love.